Hello and welcome to the EIC Clearly podcast. EIC Clearly? See what I did there? This is the podcast that brings you in-depth discussions with energy, policy and thought leaders on the most critical issues, trends and innovations shaping the global energy supply chain. Hi everybody, this is Stuart Broadley from the EIC. Welcome to another EIC Clearly podcast. I'm delighted today to be with Ricky Saez.
Good morning, Stuart, and thank you very much.
We met on the Grid UK Advisory Board, which is an event which is coming up later in 2026. So you are Programme and Project Services Director at SSEN Transmission. This is a role that really is about helping turn some of the UK's biggest energy ambitions into deliverable reality, bringing together planning, project controls, risk, cost, governance, delivery performance across this huge and complex portfolio of onshore, offshore and customer connection projects. And at the heart of it, your role exists to provide clarity, integration and truth across the portfolio, making sure decisions are grounded in reality, risks are understood early, and teams have the processes, tools and insights they need to deliver major infrastructure safely and efficiently. These projects are critical to the UK's energy security and decarbonisation ambitions. So a huge part of the role is aligning people, data and delivery across multiple businesses, partners and supply chains to help keep everything moving in the same direction. No pressure, Ricky. And then just to add to that, of course, you also still wear the other hat, which is also responsible as Programme Director for Eastern Green Link, at least in this transition phase, which is a joint venture between National Grid and SSEN Transmission. And in that role, you lead the SSEN lens of the Eastern Green Link programme, which is a national and strategically significant multibillion-pound HVDC transmission portfolio spanning EGL2, EGL3, which are both active, and EGL5, which is a development. And I mean, these projects are critical because if we don't get the grid built, and these have an overland and an underwater, a subsea element to them, which we'll come on and talk about, then all this new renewable capacity that's being built and going to be built, such as the success of AR7, it can't get transmitted and distributed. So this is one of the most important projects. It's probably right at the top of mission control and number 10. And speaking of which, as I came into the room, you were telling me how you're just back from number 10.
These projects are seismic, and I think your introduction was spot on. I think we meet Chris and his team from mission control on an almost monthly basis.
Chris Stark.
Chris Stark, yeah, sorry. He's a fantastic guy. His energy, his enthusiasm, his drive to really take this forward is what the sector needs. And it's actually a joy to work alongside him. But I think the big thing is they understand the enormity of what we're trying to do. Mm-hmm. They understand the challenge. They're looking to see how they can help us, planning constraints, how do they help support the DCO process, how can they enact the change that we need to have. But I think, yes, they're strategically, nationally important, but we need the skills, we need the labour, and we need the transitions to actually support all of that. Mm-hmm. And it's a huge activity set, and I think we're 3 mega projects in a suite of 11 mega projects that SEN has, and indeed National Grid's got a large number as well.
So we'll come on to talk about the projects in some detail a bit later on, but it would be good just to understand you as Ricky Saez. So that name for a start, what's the origin of Saez?
I'm going to tell you it's a Spanish name, and then my grandfather will give me a round and tell me it's a Basque name. So we're from Bilbao, and 3rd generation Spanish. He travelled across and he settled here, married a Scottish lady, had my dad, and then obviously my dad had me. So 3rd generation Spanish, and it gives me somebody to cheer on in the World Cup.
You've got Scotland to cheer on now, come on.
It was always interesting when I travelled to Houston, the Chevron. Every time I walked into the offices, they always called me Ricky Saez, and then they always thought I was Mexican. So that's the one place they've struggled with my Scottish accent.
And how is your Spanish?
It's very weak. I used to go out a lot during the summer holidays as a young child. I could pick it up when I was young. When I go back to Spain, I'm pretty rusty for the first couple of weeks.
You came through the apprenticeship route into BP. And then largely uninterrupted, although there was a small break, you were 20 years at BP. So let's kind of go back to the beginning. How did that start? And how was your journey with BP?
BP was an absolute joy for me. I had all of my formative years, all of my formative training And just growing up as a kind of boy into a man, into a leader, was all down to BP. So left school, was really unsure what I wanted to do. I must be honest and say I found school quite a challenge. Left school, got an apprenticeship actually initially with Volkswagen Audi. Did a year there fitting car stereos, engine management systems. I had a flair for electronics that I didn't really uncover at school. And I applied to BP to move into what we call instrumentation and control, how we measure pH, flow, temperature, pressure, all those sorts of things. I always joked to my children in the early days that if you looked at Homer Simpson's panel, I was the person that made all the lights and switches and lamps light up. So that apprenticeship was 4 years, and at the end of it, I was very, very fortunate. I won Apprentice of the Year in the UK. BP then said, look, we would love you to go and take on a graduate engineering programme. I initially knocked it back. I was quite uncomfortable with it because I'd struggled so much at school. BP was really, really good. Sent me to Heriot Watt, did a bit of an education assessment, and it turns out I was dyslexic, and they had done a number of different kind of assessments. I can't remember them all now. I think it was like, do you learn through read and recite, write and retain, oral communicate, spatial awareness? There's a fifth that always escapes me. But it turned out I had a spatial awareness brain, which is a benefit from mind maps, and that was the way that I can absorb and take in information. So I spent probably about 8 to 10 months at Heriot Watt learning new teaching skills and learning skills. And then I went on to go to university, and I was lucky to get an honours degree in power electronics, and then effectively I moved through the graduate programmes and had a variety of engineering roles in BP. It was quite fluid in BP. They changed your role every 2 years. Every time you got comfortable, that was it. It was time to move. You had to go. It was constant about growth. That sometimes meant assignments out to Alaska or assignments down to kind of LA to Arcadia, where there was big projects undergoing down there. I think the beauty of Grangemouth was it was often referred to what was called a star site, and that was where you had the upstream elements about how you collect and harvest oil and bring it on, and that was then transferred through midstream assets, and then those midstream assets then divide it into export or refinement or petrochemical. So in Grangemouth, you had a petrochemical plot site that allowed you to manufacture and make polyethylene, polyurethane, all the plastics that we all use every day of our lives. Or we would go to the refinery where you could refine it into products for diesel, petrol, etc. And then indeed we had the export terminals at Queensferry at Hound Point. So as a young man kind of trying to kind of learn all the various aspects, you had 3 completely different facilities teaching you new and different and diverse technologies. And indeed you had the marketing divisions, finance divisions for gas trading, oil trading, and major reinvestment projects and brownfield projects. For 20 years, I was changing roles all the time.
I mean, you must then be upset how Grangemouth has slipped through our fingers now and is now closed. And okay, there are ideas for how to reutilize the skills and some of the facilities, but in the end, that broad range of separate businesses and that amazing UK capability that we had there, it's gone.
Yeah, I find it really difficult, and it's hard not to feel an emotional connection. So you've got to kind of, in one way, step back and look at it through a business decision and an energy transition decision. But in the other aspect, you've got to stand back and look and go, I grew up there, I learned there, I know so many of the people, I know the communities, I know the wider ripple in the pond, how the local businesses will be impacted. But it's actually even more personal to me because my wife still works in Grangemouth. My wife works in the INEOS side of the chemical division that's still in operation. So I actually get the day-to-day feedback from her, what the impact is, how people feel. I hear about people that I know of and worked with who have been made redundant. I get contacted all the time by people looking to be supported in the energy transition, people whose children are actually part of the kind of Grangemouth facilities that are leaving the contact and ask me for support and help. So I do everything at a kind of personal level to support those people, but I can't transition everybody.
So what's gone wrong in your view?
I think it's really difficult because I think if you look back to when Grangemouth was born, it was born in the 1970s. So it's amazing because I'm born in 1976. And the Kinneil terminal in Grangemouth opened in 1976. The Kinneil site is practically exactly the same age as me. The refinery existed before the Kinneil terminal, so that refinery originated from the shale gas over in the kind of Broxburn areas. So you've got a refinery complex that is built in the 1970s. So you're really looking at a very aged asset, and it's trying to be competitive against facilities all around the world that were built late 90s, early 90s. The technologies are simply challenging to compete, but I think also we talk a lot about integrity management here. So effectively we have pipelines. Those pipelines contain high pressure, high temperature, high hazard materials. And how thick are the walls of those pipes? How corroded are the pipes? You need to be able to sign to say that the containment, the operation and the safety of these facilities is good to go. And the level of investment that you would need to put into that to maintain those is astronomically high.
It's an age and investment issue, but is there, do you think, increasingly a strategic asset issue, which is, we need to protect it for the good of the country's security and even sovereignty, or is the view that we have other options there and imports and partners around Europe is the way to go? What's your view on that?
From a kind of personal view, I think it's easy today to sit and look back and say, should more have been done? And I think in hindsight, I probably would say yes, but I wouldn't originally have had the bravery to invest when we should have invested. So before the invasion of the Ukraine, we were all comfortable importing cheap UK gas. That was the situation the UK was faced with. Nobody would have signed off to invest in a 1970s refinery. Now we sit here today and we know that Russia has invaded the Ukraine. We know that we're dependent on Russian gas. We know that we need to strive for energy independence and energy security, and that we need a transition and a skills blend to cope with that. But we're now in a transition where we're now investing heavily in our renewables that we took decisions 5, 6, almost 10 years ago. So I think it's easy with today's data set to look back and say more should have been done. But I think the decisions were taken at the time with the data set that was available at that time. Yes, I think there's an exposure that comes with that. But I think when you look at the ethylene cracker, so I think recently Moss Morn announced that it was going to close. But I think the government has come in to ensure that the ethylene facilities, the KG, stays in operation. So I think we're making decisions now with that energy security and energy independence that maybe we wouldn't have made 5 to 10 years ago, at the time that the refinery really needed the investment.
If you're enjoying this podcast and think you have an inspiring story to tell, contact me, Stuart Broadley, directly, as I would love to do a sea-level podcast with you too. EIC is proud to be the UK's largest membership energy trade association and the 5th largest in the world. We are unique around the world for 3 reasons. We are truly energy agnostic, believing all energy technologies are vital to delivering energy security, affordability and a just transition. We are the only energy trade association anywhere in the world that offers a truly in-house one-stop shop for market intelligence, networks and events to help our members export, diversify and grow. And we are proud to be the voice of the energy supply chain, advocating for the 5 golden rules of a healthy energy supply chain. More details on EIC membership, the 5 golden rules, details about doing a future podcast with me, and how to contact us about anything else are in the description for this podcast. So let's come up to date then. 2020 was when you joined SSEN.
The SSE role is really complex because if you go historically back, I'm going to say 5 years, maybe 7 years, I think SSE, National Grid and Scottish Power here, in the transmission space would maybe do 1 mega project every 3 or 4 years. SSE's last major project was around 450 million. And that was the Shetland project to connect Shetland to the mainland. Probably it went into operation 21-22. And we now have 11 mega projects totaling £29 billion of investment. What you then have is a whole series of projects that are mega in their own right. Those 11 projects are made up by 47 major projects in their own right. They sit across 7 mega hubs, and effectively you need to deliver concurrently in operation, targeting the same supply chain that is dependent to do the Scottish Power projects, that's dependent to do the tenant programmes, Amprion, 50 Hertz, Red Electrica, pick your TO. So effectively we're now operating at mega scale concurrently, and that is completely different to anything that the sector has ever done. I do draw a lot on my Chevron experience because Chevron, the project out there was called the TCO project, which was Tengiz Chevron. It was a 47 billion US project, multifaceted, and that included building airports, accommodation centres, included building the downstream, upstream assets, everything simultaneously. And that project is the closest parallel I can get to what we're doing now. And I use that almost on a daily basis as a reference point.
So directly today, you're program director for 2 projects in construction and 1 in development. The 2 projects in construction, I call them EGL 2 and 3. But you don't call them that, do you?
This is a little bit of a history. So I joined in December of 2021, really excited, massive opportunity, and I was going to enthusiastically telling my kids at home, this is what I'm going to do, we're going to really unleash the energy transition, it's a massive opportunity. 12-year-old daughter recalibrates me and says, so you're going to fix in the second half of your career what you ruined in the first? That was me clipped by my daughter Eva. But all of that said and done, they are massive, massive projects. So when I joined, the projects were called Seagulls, which for those of you from the northeast of Scotland or from Scotland, Seagulls aren't the most popular of things. Seagull was the Scotland to England green link. So it was all very logical, but not very marketable. So our marketing division was very quick to tell us, look, if we're going to go and sell this to community groups.
We all know what seagulls do.
We all know what seagulls do. Yeah. And you don't want to be associated with that, Ricky. So no. We dropped the S, and then it became Eastern Green Link. And then we felt the Eagle was a much more kind of sellable bird, and we called them Eagles. So we've got Eagle 2, 3 and 5 that you've called out today. So Eagle 2 has been through determination.
Total install cost is £4.3 billion, in line with the Ofgem determination. I understand there is an opportunity to go back if you need to reopen windows for any unforeseen circumstances, but that at the moment in time, everything is on plan for £4.3 billion.
If we then look at Eagle 3, it's not fully in construction at this moment in time. We use an activity which is much the same as what a lot of projects use, a stage gate process. We call it LCP, which is large capital process. And effectively, we will move into construction formally in the late summer. Eagle 3 is a bit unique in nature, where you've got the Scottish and English planning processes being out of sync. So the English one's tied into the development consent order, which means we can't fully move into construction until we get planning permission. We can't ask for the funding from Ofgem until we know we've got planning and consent.
To be clear, right, that this is moving electricity from Scotland to England, in simple terms.
Yeah, so if we boil it all back, we are energy agnostic. So we move power. It doesn't matter whether it comes from a gas power station or a nuclear power station, or it comes out battery storage or on or offshore wind. Now, we all know that the northeast is one of the most dominant areas for harvestable wind, and these projects will most likely transfer clean, green, renewable power, but we are energy agnostic and we will transfer power that is generated in Scotland or indeed England, north or south, because the link is bi-directional. What that does mean is that on the very few days in Scotland when the wind doesn't blow, we can empower. So we harvest the wind in Scotland through the offshore wind farms or the onshore wind farms. On the occasions when it doesn't, we have the opportunity for battery to make that up. And effectively, if you look at the generation trajectory, that's what will enable all of that. What we then have is an abundance of energy, and more energy than Scotland as a whole can consume. So what we then need to do is to move that power around Scotland to get it to the export links that will exist with the Eastern Green Link projects, the Eagle projects. So you will see projects, for example, Spittal to Peterhead or the Western Isles or Beauly to Denny, and effectively that is how we move and transfer power around Scotland to get it to where it needs to be to also support the export routes south.
But the starting point for both Eagle 2 and 3 is...
It's Peterhead.
Yeah.
So Eagle 2 will be a project in its own physical geographical space. It's quite a unique set of circumstances because we have the gas-fired power station that sits in Peterhead, and directly opposite is the Eagle 2 site. So you can actually see the transition looking towards the coast and then looking inland to see the Eagle site. And actually when you take Eagle 2 down to England, it actually sits directly opposite Drax biomass power station. So it's quite unique that you can actually see the transmission infrastructure that will support that. 2 projects are what we call 2 gigawatts. What does 2 gigawatts actually mean? 2 gigawatts is 2 million homes. So we collect the power, we use a technology called VSC, and that allows us to convert it from AC to DC. The reason we use DC is you can transmit it a long distance without having any losses. So we go out into the kind of North Sea, we then have a marine corridor south, we land in the Bridlington area of Yorkshire, and we do 68 kilometres into Drax Power Station for Eagle 2, and we land on the Lincolnshire coastal node for Eagle 3, and then we travel south through Lincolnshire to a little village called Warpool, where we'll actually terminate for Eagle 3. Eagle 5 will actually originate again in Peterhead, and it will transfer another 2 million homes with power, and this will terminate in the original Eagle 3 facility directly on the Lincolnshire coastal node. And that's the 3 projects.
What percentage of the power that is currently being made in Scotland will run through these transmission lines, or is this all for future power construction?
There's 2 categorizations here. So Eagle 2 originally started off with a bit of a horrible acronym, and it's called LOTI, which is Large Offshore Transmission Investment. So effectively that was you build a process to talk to Ofgem to justify the project, and the project was all about what we call constraint removal. So you can probably see the press is generally littered up with how much we have to pay offshore wind farms not to generate electricity because there's no transmission.
And this leads to curtailment.
And this leads to curtailment. So we will be able to remove that curtailment costs through Eagle 2. So Eagle 2 is not dependent on any wind farms getting built. It's constraint removal, it's curtailment removal.
Is this part of the financial justification, in fact, is through the curtailment payments being reduced, and that then justifies partial construction costs for Eagle 2?
For Eagle 2, the business case was really straightforward because the containment costs are now so expensive, it necessitates the need for Eagle 2. Eagle 3 will support the Scotland fields, where Eagle 2 will remove the existing constraint.
Would these be the fields that were recently announced in AR7, or is it ones that have already reached FID in previous allocation rounds?
These are future pipeline projects.
So these are all future projects, which, AR7, we've got more than £8 billion worth of projects that have reached the CFD, not yet FID. So that's what we'll see.
Yep.
Hopefully that'll get through. Is that right? So that's the logic. And the ones that are Scotland-based, obviously not all of those were Scotland-based.
Yeah, and I think some of the Scotland ones will come in at most of them connections.
Yeah.
So I think landfalls are now becoming a bit of a constraint for the UK, which I think in time will lead to multi-terminal future offshore grids. But at this moment in time, there will be direct point-to-point links.
So is a business constraint for SSE, effectively it is land links and also competing transmission lines? Like, so for instance, the new multi-European power island setup that was announced at the start of 2026, is that a competing transmission concept for you and your business cases, so a threat to the business cases somehow?
We don't see that as a threat at all. So I think this moment in time, what we have is the offshore wind farms that are leased under Scotland. And there is already more wind farms than there is transmission links. So we need to work with Scottish Government, work with the NESO, work with Ofgem to unlock and realise all of the Scotland opportunities. As we look to further enhance the European bloc and independence and energy security, then the supergrids will kick in, and that then becomes future business cases multi-years down the line.
You'll already be in place and already transmitting, distributing, so therefore they'll then have to make their own business case as to whether they have new power demands, new opportunities.
Yeah, and that will all be linked to the maturity and evolution of floating offshore wind. So I think this is really important. We're making decisions and investments and aspirations for technology that are still very formative. So I think it's great that we want to have that ambition and that energy, but I think they've also got to realise and deliver what we know is more tangible in the here and now. The NESO, so the network system operator, is effectively looking at how do we really support the future pipeline. So Shetland 2, Eagle 5, the Wiggle, if you want to call it that, the Western Green Link that National Grid will deliver over on the West Coast. So that next wave of pipeline projects is where we are. And I think that's the kind of key areas that we need to look at.
I think some people are unclear about the link between power demand place, and renewable projects that are being built, or at least are being talked about being built in the future at a great scale. And already, as you say, Scotland is producing more power than it needs. So it's already a net exporter of renewable power. although a lot of that is constrained or curtailed right now, so it could be, but it's not yet. Do you see that there is a healthy process here where it's okay to keep on building more and more offshore wind farms because there'll be a way of getting that taken to where it's needed, terminated in the right place, or exported to external markets? Or do you see that link very clearly being set out by NESO and others? For an organisation like yours, are you having to be more transactional, which is, we can't control the future, we don't know what the overall bigger plan is, but we just look at each business case and we go ahead based upon that because that's all you can do?
It's not a standard business case operating inside a transmission asset. And that was actually probably most of my learning in 2022. So we don't go out and target projects that we think we want to deliver. That's not how we operate. We have an obligation under our license conditions to deliver those projects. So what happens is the network system operator makes a decision on what is best for the UK from a spatial planning perspective, from an energy transfer perspective, and what it believes to be the most efficient case to transfer that power, harvest that power. Once they've made that case, they then have to work with Ofgem to determine, is it best that the transmission operators deliver those? And that's when you'll hear us talk about, is it exempt from competition or does it go out to market? So then it's the NESO that decides what projects need to get done, and then Ofgem determines who's best placed to deliver those projects on behalf of the consumer. And under our electricity transmission licence, we are obligated to deliver those projects. So then it's about how quickly can you do it, how efficiently can you do it, and then how can you meet it, the timeframes that are deliverable. So the business cases are kind of almost flipped and pivoted a little bit differently.
You're not a nationally owned company. So although by license you're obliged to do the work, obviously there's a commercially acceptable agreement that then has to be reached. How does that work? And also there's a joint venture which also has to be thrown into the mix as well. So how does it all work to move from, we're going to have to do this, to, okay, we all agree that it makes financial sense?
Yeah, so effectively we have a regulated asset value and we get a return on our asset. This is a RAV model. So effectively we are pseudo in competition with Ofgem. So I go and create, what is it going to take to go and deliver Eagle 2? I then develop what that cost basis is, what that cost estimate is. I used to be project director on Eagle 2 in the early days, and I drove the whole Eagle 2 process, route to market, procurement process. We call it a project assessment. It's going to transition into cost assessments. And effectively, I then go into competition with Ofgem where they look at and say, is that an efficient expenditure? Will we give you disallowable costs? Do we think that's a reasonable and fair price? Did you run a really competitive procurement exercise? Have you really sweated the best value for the consumer? And I got grilled to within an inch of my life with Ofgem, making sure, is this really good value for the consumer? Can you really do it in the time frame? Are you asking for an excessive risk margin? And that enduring joint venture will have the foundations for Eagle 5, which is in the pipeline of transitioning in. But effectively what we've looked to do is how can we build an efficient joint venture that allows for the uniqueness and the asset transfer at the end. So if you almost visualize a kind of hierarchy here where you'll have consistent safety systems across the joint venture, consistent cost control, consistent project management, consistent project planning, all of the things you'd expect in there. Okay, so we've got the whole services that need to be consistent. Then what you have is you have 2 projects and 2 and 3 and any potential future projects. And those projects have special purpose vehicles. Those special purpose vehicles will exist and operate for the life of the asset. So both TOs fund the special purpose vehicle. We build the asset for and on behalf of National Grid and SSE. At the end of that, we return those assets into the TOs and the TOs own them as regulated assets.
And they take the risk. So if it's overspend, if it's late, that's how the regulated asset-based model works, which is it's agreed up front and then right, the risk is now yours. So there's enough risk assumption built in for you to achieve it, but anything that goes wrong sits with you.
And there's the ODI process, which effectively incentivizes us or penalizes us. So that if we deliver early, there's an opportunity for upside. If we deliver late.
And from an Ofgem point of view, they prefer the RAB model, as so do Treasury now, because they feel that it protects consumers and businesses from cost surprises. So because, of course, there's, UK is one of the highest energy cost countries of the world. And so this is one of the ways they're trying to protect against that. They use it for Sizewell C, the nuclear project as well. Do you think it works in that way, and or does it naturally mean that obviously in a regulated asset-based model, you've got to do some kind of protection for future things that can go wrong, because there's nowhere to go. Once you've signed up to it, the risk does sit with you.
There's always a tension that exists in here. So I think absolutely the model works. Absolutely it drives consumer protection and consumer value. I think there's an anecdotal story here. So we had quite a senior member of the Ofgem team eventually joined the project teams. He's now going to be running Eagle 5, but has helped heavily on Eagle 3. And he was always there to challenge and to kind of say, are you doing enough? Are you efficient in your expenditure? And he was advocating, as he should, on behalf of the consumer. We got a flight home on Friday night and he was saying, you know what, you guys really, really do drive this. He said it would actually be really good if we had secondment opportunities where people in Ofgem could actually see what you were trying to do and how you're driving that. So that kind of validated to me that we're doing the right thing. So I think that's an important, and it's anecdotal, I accept that, but that is testament to what the project teams are doing.
One of the things before we then sort of go back into the day job, but I think it's just interesting to understand how this fits in some of the big questions that constantly are out there. We do have a high cost of energy in the UK. So one of the questions that is kind of constantly talked about in kind of UK media is, why do we have such a high cost of energy? And obviously transmission is talked about as we're having to double the size of the grid in the UK in the next 10 years, and then double it again 10 years later, of which I guess you could say Eagle 2 or 3 are part of the first 10 years, and then Eagle 5 maybe part of the next 10 years. Do you see that there's frustration across the board with people not being able to really have transparency around cost of energy today and how it's made up, and why in the future it's hard to guarantee how it'll reduce? There's absolutely not something you can easily answer. I haven't found actually anybody that can easily answer this question, but it seems to me always very frustrating or very sort of puzzling that there isn't some kind of role with NISA or someone that says, don't worry, we have full transparency of each step of the process here, exactly why we have high cost of energy today and exactly what the steps are over the next 20 years to halve it or whatever. And here's fully detailed transparency on how we're going to achieve it with, and these are the 5 levers of how we're going to do it and the 5 risks. I don't see that anywhere. And this must be part of what you're feeling, this kind of high pressure job you have. Part of it is delivering on time, and the RAB model delivers on budget. So that's already done for you. You know your budget. But do you feel also this sort of general sense of we need to get the cost down? And how does that affect your job?
There's about 3 lenses to this answer. Number one, will grid infrastructure in time reduce cost to the consumer? Yes, it will. So we will remove the curtailment costs that exist today as part of Eagle 2. So that's a positive, and we'll realise the benefits of that in the mid-2030s. Eagle 3 will do exactly the same. But the obvious question is, why do we have to pay a higher cost now for energy? The reason we have to pay a higher cost, we didn't invest at the time that we should have invested in the grid. And I think you could argue that there's a huge cost difference between what Eagle 2, Eagle 3 cost today than what they would have costed 10 years ago. But it comes down to technologies. Did we feel that the VSC technology was really, really robust? Did we feel that the XLPE cable was really robust? Could we actually go forward at pace and scale with the confidence that we have today? No, we didn't. Did we feel that we potentially wanted to go more nuclear? Did we feel that actually we maybe need to maintain gas and get the CCGTs into operation? And I think the UK was almost in a slight state of paralysis about trying to identify what was the best energy policy for the UK. And we tried as a country to spread bet across gas, offshore and onshore wind, and indeed a little bit of nuclear. And I think in time maybe SMR technologies and things will come in. So I think we're paying the price now for not maybe being a little bit bolder 5 to 10 years ago. But I think the costs that you see, we're running into multi-billions. You have to be absolutely certain to take those FID decisions. And I have got some sympathy for the government in that aspect. But I think the grid will unlock cheaper energy in the future, but it's going to take us a longer time to kind of realise that. And that's difficult for consumers to hear.
Are you an energy business looking to revisit your strategy? Did you know EIC's Consult team helped 50 businesses last year? How? We help them with their strategic investment decisions using EIC's award-winning market intelligence and data to provide them with tailored, pragmatic BD strategies, presentations, and reports. It works. Our data and insights have helped customers to confirm their decisions to export, diversify, and grow. Contact us now to learn more about EIC Consult and begin your own journey to smarter decisions. Details in the description below.
I'm just really interested in basically so many things that are aspects of your day job. Let's just pick on one of them. What is always a NIMBYism topic, which is overground transmission versus underground transmission.
To move power around the country, the cheapest way to do that is with an overhead pylon. There is no getting away from that. We are completely cognizant of the fact that they are visually unloved, and we operate in areas of special scientific beauty, we operate in areas of special scientific interest, and we will always look and be sympathetic to those areas and how we can best accommodate that. I think I don't have any overhead line projects in my portfolio, but a lot of my colleagues do. And what I do know is that they have went out to public consultation, and I think in nearly all of the cases they've completely modified and changed as far as they possibly can through consultation the routes. So does it mean it's perfect? Of course it doesn't. Does it mean that they've listened and they've modified and they've adapted and they've tried to accommodate where they can? Yes, they have. And I think it goes back to your earlier question. How do we make energy more affordable? We're faced with that trilemma, aren't we? Nobody wants an overhead pylon, but nobody wants to pay a huge amount of money for electricity. So we need to be responsible and do it in the most cost-efficient manner. And we need to work with our consumers and our communities, look to how we can actually eliminate the specifics where we can at reasonable cost.
Your direct scope of responsibility is what in these projects?
So effectively, I start at the AC substation in Peterhead. So the AC substation in Peterhead collects the energy. And then that AC substation has an underground cable to transfer AC power to the converter, which I tell my kids it's a giant cowshed with some really clever technology inside it, and it effectively then transfers the AC to DC, and then effectively we transfer that through subsea marine cable, and we go huge distances south, 530 odd kilometres south, and then 68 kilometres buried HVDC project, and then we land in the converter site and we reverse it. We turn it from kind of DC back into AC, and then we land it in the AC connections inside the Drax power station facility.
And what's the main schedule outcome that you're working to?
Eagle 2 is looking to be energised in the Q3 of 2029. Well on plan to do that. I think we're circa 1.5% to 2% ahead of plan as we sit here today. Teams have had a phenomenal start. I could not have wished for a better start, and I'm really, really proud of what the team have achieved there. I think going first is always a horrible thing because you have to make the mistakes, you have to stand in the landmines, you have to kind of forge the new path. And I think there's a huge responsibility on us, and it's completely not lost on me because Ofgem, Desnes, Chris Stark that we spoke about at the start, everybody looks at the Eagle 2 project to actually demonstrate that we can deliver these. We've got 11 projects in SSE. Our investors are looking, can we deliver it?
It's part of the pressure I was talking about that you must be under.
So Eagle 2 is the one that must deliver. Eagle 3 is a much more complex scope, much more difficult project, but from an Eagle 2 perspective, it simply has to work, and we have to prove that it can be done.
And what's the main challenges you're facing then? Is it supply chain? Is it community?
From an Eagle 2 perspective, it comes down to our OEM partners is Hitachi Energy in this instance. They're doing the transformers, they're doing the converters, they're doing all of the HVDC technology. But order of magnitude wise, back in 2022, these guys were maybe doing 2 projects a year. These guys are now knocking out 27, 28 projects a year. So I think the OEMs are seeing a lot of challenge in that space. So we've had to partner with them. We simply have to operate what we call the collaboration and partnership model. And we went through a really good exercise at the start with our civil contractors, our regulators, the governments, and indeed the kind of wider SSE business and National Grid business is every single one of us have to pull together. We fly out people to Ludvika, which is the OEM head office, base ourselves in there. How can we collaborate? How can we get through the engineering challenges together? We've got real heavy populations of people camped out on site working with the civil contractors because it's collective success here. That's what we're striving for.
These HVDC OEMs, similar to the gas turbine OEMs, with a parallel booms in data centers and in offshore wind build out and in grid build out all over the world, all at the same time. And they've all been burnt in the past with booms that then quickly crash and they've overinvested. So how are you persuading them to prioritize your project over others? Because everybody will be trying to persuade them.
Yeah, so I think I'm actually going to really commend Ofgem here. So if I go back to the ASTI process, so our ASTI process is effectively the funding mechanism for these projects. And what ASTI allowed us to do was a thing that we call CRAs. And a CRA is a capacity reservation agreement. And that allows us to pay a fairly significant upfront cost to all of the supply chain partners. Now, if you look at NKT, they're away building expansions of the Carroll Corona facility. Prysmian were building a new facility in Piccola, which is an utterly mesmerising place to be. I was out there. It's now got the highest structure in the whole of Finland. It's truly special to be. But those CRA payments allow the upfront investment that are necessary to unlock these projects. So we can invest in the people, we can invest in the technology, we can invest in the factories, and we can actually build all of that. Eagle 2 will be delivered by a brand new installation vessel. If you looked at my risk register back in December 21-22, we had a project that effectively didn't have a technology finalised. We had factories all around the world that hadn't been built. Most of the supply chain partners didn't have the vessels that we needed to build. And I was going to Ofgem to say, can you give me some money to go and build a project? It was a really strange place to be. So Ofgem had to come forward and accept and own some of that risk. We as investors, as SSE and National Grid, had to own some of that risk. We had to be able to invest early in our supply chain partners to allow them to actually offset some of that risk. So we eventually awarded Prysmian the contract. That meant that we had to build a hull in Romania. It was a turd all the way down the Danube, all the way up to Norway, factory fit-outs. Then we put it out to sea trials. It's currently doing 1 or 2 sea campaigns, and then it will turn up in 2028 as a brand new vessel to actually do the installation for us to realise Eagle 2. These are absolutely global projects now. Eagle 2 on its own has got 14 manufacturing facilities this year across the whole of Europe. We're geographically diverse across them. We've got DNV supporting. I've got project managers that are solely focused on the procurement and manufacturing through Europe. They spend practically half their lives in airports, flying round about all of these places, making sure that surveillance systems, QA, QC, new factories, new supply chains, that all of that is working before they actually land on site for construction. So it is mega in scale, it's mega in complexity, and it's mega in risk. And my responsibility is to ensure that we have all of that running smoothly.
It's quite an impressive project. I mean, that's understating it. But it goes back to your BP days, I think, and maybe your Chevron days, doesn't it, where you were talking about you have to be comfortable to manage multiple projects, complex projects at the same time, and calmly work through the problem, solve each problem one at a time, and just make progress. And that sounds, talking to you like, that's why you've got this job, I guess. How are you building a team that is able to handle this kind of pressure to this level of excellence that's required, this level of complexity? What I mean by that is so many still things that are unknown and so many things that can happen that's below this project, of course. How are you building a team that can handle that?
The team is the most vital ingredient to all of this. So I think the first thing I had to do was to actually develop what is the purpose. And I think if people believe in a purpose, then generally they'll go above and beyond. And I think the purpose of these projects is fantastic. It's an easy sell. We want to decarbonise the economies. We want to create a better environment for our children to grow up in. And we want to leave a legacy that is 6, maybe possibly 8 million homes if Eagle 6 or offshore grids do happen. So huge opportunity to actually deliver something meaningful and something purposeful. So the purpose is the drive, the energy, the inertia. It's something that gives you that why I get out of my bed. What we then have to think about, and we didn't have this originally, the purpose drove us and we had to operate with that purpose through 22 and 23. At the start of 2024, I launched a transition plan that said turning purpose into process. And it's getting much more efficient in how we operate and how we do, because I was on a one-way ticket to burnout, as was the team. But how do you get something off the ground? I used to often refer to this project, and these projects was a multi-billion-pound startup. You've taken SSE, you've taken National Grid, you've forced them together, you've created a new entity, and you have to do it at pace. You have to integrate systems, tools, processes, all of that at the same time as securing a supply chain and getting your funding strategy. That sounds much easier than it actually was. But when you go through that, people are going to feel strained, people are going to feel pressure, people are going to feel vulnerable, they're going to feel exposed, because this is a really, really hard environment. So the number one thing I have to do as a leader is create a psychologically safe space that people can go, I can't do this, that won't work, we can't deliver that in time. And I need to have an environment that people can put their hand up. So I invented a thing called the not doing list. So if we've got an activity set, then I trust you to deliver that activity set. But you have permission every Thursday to tell me what you're not doing. And then what we can do is every Friday we sit down as a collective and we look at what's the not doing list. Is there anything on that not doing list that's going to catch us out? Is there something that we actually need to get a sprint team or a task force or an area to focus in? And that's how I lead the team, and that's how we can operate.
I think the work you're doing is pretty inspirational. It's obviously strategically critical. Are you feeling like it's all starting to come together now? Or are you feeling like there's still some critical things that need to be done, not just for Eagle 2 and 3, but more broadly to get this grid rollout working as it should?
If I go to summer of last year, I had a high level of uncertainty in a large number of areas. So if I look at Eagle 3, we didn't have a material scope change. So we hadn't agreed with Ofgem what the revised scope was. We hadn't agreed what the delivery date with Ofgem was. We were right in the balance of where we were on a procurement process and what was that procurement process going to throw out. My colleagues in the offshore space and in SSE hadn't entered into contracts for their programmes of works. So when I sit here and I look at you now, Eagle 3 has agreed a material scope change with Ofgem. We now have a revised delivery date. We now have a converter supplier. And we've now signed the shareholding agreement. All of my colleagues in the offshore space have signed all their contracts. So it feels that the momentum's there now. And we've went from all of the myriad of uncertainty that exists, using the FID as a kind of crude term, to actually, it's now post-FID, and the ASTI projects are now into construction. And I think construction isn't without its complexities, but it's something that we're much more traditionally used to. That will bring challenges around, can we get enough blue-collar workers? Can we accommodate all of that? Do we need European ways or visa waiver programs? How do we support all of that? But they're almost traditional headaches to manage. And I think now we have those in. So I think you're kind of wave one, if you want to call it that, of ASTI. I think we're in a really good place. I think we need to get a little bit of certainty around what's coming next, because what we want to ensure is that we don't have the little boom or bust, or the slight boom, little bit of a shortfall, then boom again. Because if Eagle 5 comes, Eagle 6 offshore grid comes, or Shetland 2, what would be really good for the UK is we just roll that skill blend onto the next projects. And that way we'll become more efficient as we go. And I don't think we've fully joined up the dots on how all of that flow will go through yet.
And that's critical to reducing the cost of energy through future RAB agreements as well.
Exactly. So I think there's a space to go about how we actually line up the 2030s into the 2040s, if you want to call it that. And I think that's really, really important. And that's a conversation that I really need to work with regulators and governments on to ensure that we harmonise that pipeline. I think the next thing is we will go through transitions in governments, and it's trying to maintain that stability in the UK energy pipeline such that the investment is robust and it's stabilised. And I think I would almost reach out to my friends in government to try and stabilise that. But overall...
What do you mean by stabilise that? You mean consistent policy and keep the money flowing, don't change the view on net zero and just keep going?
Keep going. So you have invested huge sums of money, but billions upon billions, multi-billions. You mentioned it right at the start. But that multi-billion was just the Eagle programme. You've got SSE's investment, multi-billion. You've got Scottish Power's multi-billion-pound investment, as is National Grid's.
But the money's not government money. All they're doing is through Ofgem regulating this is what consumers will have to pay.
What happens if in 5 years' time Reform say we're going to cancel all the offshore wind projects and we're now going to go with oil and gas?
So this is what you're really talking about, is even with a change of government, respect the fact that the grid rollout is a critical infrastructure.
Exactly. How do we keep consistency of delivery? Consistency of delivery can only be consistent if it's built in sustainable policy.
It's interesting how you're in the world where you need people to be thinking beyond a 5-year electoral cycle. That's just part of your life, which is you're making 10 to 20-year project decisions, and they're not the sort of project decision where once you made it, the politics doesn't matter anymore because you're off and running, and it's got more about global markets. This is a domestic project for domestic markets, domestic demand, domestic supply. Yeah, so it's all about consistent long-term policy. Actually, it's really interesting that you say it so simply. So I think for people listening, and hopefully they understand that, this can go wrong with a radical change of policy. Suddenly either demand stops, supply stops, and you're caught in the middle.
Yeah, if I look at the OEMs, so if I'm Siemens or I'm Hitachi or GE or Mitsubishi, for any one of these suppliers, they look at, is the UK an investable market? Does it have a stability of policy? Do we want to take a risk of investing there? What happens if they become islanded projects? What's the risk profile of doing business with SSE? Do they have a guaranteed relationship with Ofgem?
And is the UK a better or worse market than all the other markets of the world?
You've closed my sentence perfectly. That's where I was going to go. You take that out to Red Electrica in Spain, or you go out to Amprion or 50 Hertz. What's their governments doing? What's their policies? What's the stability? Because at the end of the day, we all want to invest in markets that we know are safe and stable. And there's more work to go around than the OEMs need to pick and choose. And at this moment in time, we're referred to in the UK as the customer of choice. People want to do business with us. We pay our bills in time. We're collaborative partners. We've got stability in the energy policies that we do. We've got a balanced regulator that understands risk. That's a really good place for the UK to be perceived by the big super majors across Europe.
I think that's a brilliant place to end, which is we're the place to do business. And you're here talking about our globally recognized commitment to the green agenda, which is then the AR7 and AR8 and future allocation rounds that ensure a continuing pipeline of giga-scale power generation projects in the renewable space, which includes nuclear, a commitment to the grid infrastructure to then get the power from where it's produced to where it's needed, a commitment to a continuity of that policy to ensure that costs progressively come down, which start to bring down the cost of energy for consumers and businesses. That's needed to attract more data centers and investment generally. It's a cycle that once you start sticking to that approach, then everybody starts to get the benefits. Foreign direct investment improves and so on. It makes sense, right?
It's a life cycle. It's evergreen. And I sat and had dinner celebrating the Hitachi contracts. I was fortunate enough to have Carol Trowell on one side, and I had Nicholas Parsons, the executive president of Hitachi, sat next to me. And we were talking, this is the next step, is how we optimise delivery for the UK. So we are delivering at scale and at pace. And the next step is, how do we really become super efficient at that? And we were making kind of very early notional discussions, getting out to Ludvika, actually bringing the regulators with us. How do we become more efficient? And it's such a level of trust now that I can actually talk about the constraints on my side. Nicholas was talking openly about his. We're in a really privileged place that these pipelines have given us the ability that we can all sit down and actually look at integrated efficiency. It's a really good point.
Yeah, so you see a future which is a very inspiring future for a pipeline of projects, pipeline of renewable energy which leads to clean power, a pipeline of grid build-out which leads to low cost of energy, and a highly investable place for more businesses to come and do their work in the future, and for the supply chains to be loyal to the UK projects as long as we don't mess up consistency of policy and investment. I think that's a brilliant way to finish. Ricky, thank you so much for spending so much time. And I think taking us through in really brutal honesty about what it's like for you in your day job. I hope everybody listening in have gained a huge respect for the importance and the difficulty of such a critical infrastructure project like this, and the sort of positive vibes we bring to you with good luck. I hope it goes well. We want it to succeed. It's actually great to hear the progress you're making. And this feels like you've broken through all those early challenges and now you can see the future. You can see 2029. It's there. Perhaps we'll do another one of these in a couple of years' time when you're nearly there and we can do an update on it.
Yeah, I was thinking it would be a really good opportunity maybe to get you up to Peterhead. I think this year we will have somewhere in the region of 92% of the physical structures built. So you'll actually be able to see the site and the shape it will be. So maybe target a couple of years from now and we can do it on site and we can show you what it looks like.
I would love that. I really would. So thank you so much, Ricky. Thanks again.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Well, that's our show for today. A huge shout out to Samara, Lucas and Joao and the rest of our incredible team behind the scenes. This show truly wouldn't happen without them. If you enjoyed this podcast, it would mean the world if you'd hit that follow button. Give a 5-star rating or leave a review. It's the best way to help us keep doing what we love. And as a thank you, I'll leave you with my favourite 5-word joke. Love wind power. Big fan.